Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Sam Mowe, Tricycle's publisher, and I'm happy to be here with you for What is Enlightenment with Dale Wright. We'll have some time for questions at the end of this session, so if you have any, please ask them by clicking on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can. We're also going to send a recording of this event afterwards for anyone who would like to watch it again. My guest today is Dale Wright. Uh, Dale is professor emeritus at Occidental College in Los Angeles, where he has taught religious studies and Asian studies. He's the author of a number of books, including Philosophical Meditations on Zen Buddhism, The Six Perfections, Buddhism and the Cultivation of Character, What is Buddhist Enlightenment, and Living Skillfully, Buddhist Philosophy of Life from the Vimalakirti Sutra. He also co-leads a Substack project called Fire Philosophy, Nietzsche, Zen, and How to Live. I should also say that Dale was my teacher at Occidental and somebody I have long admired. So welcome, Dale.
Thank you for inviting me, Sam, and welcome to everyone. Good to be here.
All right. Well, I thought we'd start with the word enlightenment. Can you tell us a bit about how enlightenment became the English word that we use for Buddhism's highest goal?
I can. Before I do that, I should say something about the audacity of writing a book called What is Buddhist Enlightenment? Where I'm just really probing in every direction I can to figure out how that experience has taken place in Buddhism and how it's come to affect us. And part of that is the language of enlightenment. So we're talking here about a European word. There's no Sanskrit or Pali word that was used very frequently in Buddhism to name enlightenment, right? What we call enlightenment or awakening. But at some point, the words are nirvana, obviously, and bodhi, and several others. But initially in Europe, once the colonization began to happen in India and in Sri Lanka and elsewhere in Myanmar, Burma, they began to encounter Buddhism, Hinduism at the same time. And for the most part, they couldn't distinguish between Hinduism and Buddhism. They just kind of seemed the same. They were so different from Christianity and Judaism and Islam, which were the familiar Western religions. But in translating the word nirvana, which seemed to be the primary topic for Buddhists, it came out in European languages as nothingness, das Nix in German. And it was part of this, the image that many of you know, of blowing out the candle, blowing out the flame, meaning extinguishing the cycle of rebirths, getting out of the over and over coming back into the world of suffering and into some sphere that they couldn't say anything about. But to Europeans, that seemed like incomprehensible for one thing, and also religiously depraved, right? If you say the goal of Buddhism is nothingness, like what? How could that possibly be? And so Buddhism was disdained for the most part. Hinduism was honored because words, talking about the oneness of all things, they could understand something along those lines a little better. But in Germany, as time went on, and European scholars got better and better at reading these old Sanskrit and Pali texts, they began to sense, okay, there's more than nothingness going on here. Clearly, the Buddha attained nirvana and then lived for another almost 50 years, half century, acting as a fully aware, sensitive, wise, compassionate person. And so here's somebody who'd achieved something really amazing, and you don't want to be calling that nothingness. So I poked around, this is years ago, even a couple of decades ago, poked around curious, where did the word enlightenment start being used in reference to Buddhism? And it was Max Mueller, and first reference I could see was 1854, I think it was. And he just pokes that in. It doesn't say why he's using that word, but it seems to fit, right? Because enlightenment meant for Europeans sort of the highest state of mind or the highest state of our culture. And so in India and in China, they also had highest states. They were advanced civilizations. So they used that same word to refer to the state of mind of somebody who had really achieved something outstanding in Buddhism. So, and it meant something very positive. It meant, well, going back a little further, there was a big debate in Germany. And the question was, what is enlightenment? And that's why I named my book, What is Buddhist Enlightenment? And what I said at the beginning of the book is, these people in Europe couldn't imagine that Buddhism had anything to do with enlightenment. They couldn't imagine that religion had anything to do with enlightenment, because enlightenment was a state of modern maturity of mind where you really trusted yourself to be able to think clearly on your own. You didn't need the priest to tell you what to do or how to act or what to believe. You didn't need overlords. Democratic sensibilities were beginning to emerge. So it was really a mature state of the modern, strong, wise person. And so this debate went on. The greatest answer was given by the greatest philosopher, Immanuel Kant, who said that enlightenment is a state of maturity in individuals and communities where they really trust themselves to think clearly on their own, make their own decisions, and to decide whether heaven is the appropriate goal or not. Now, Kant basically thought it was, but he was also impressed that people could decide that for themselves, didn't have to be told. So the fact that that term got applied to Buddhism kind of accidentally was good news for Buddhists, because it meant good things in Europe and in the West, not the negative connotations of nothingness. So Buddhism, the tide began to turn. Buddhism began to be respected by the late 19th century. The translation, not translations, but storytelling about the life of the Buddha and great Buddhists began to emerge in European languages. And these were admirable people, right? These were amazing people. And so Buddhists began to have a reputation shift from being really negative to really being quite positive, beginning of what's called, say, the Theosophical Society, other European and American groups that were who really thought that something exists in Asia that we lack, and that they're actually more enlightened than we are. And that really began to reverse things. It didn't hurt. In fact, it helped greatly that Buddhism could be seen as a non-theistic religion. You could even put an atheistic religion, put it kind of strongly, but it means you can be a Buddhist without believing in God. Some Buddhists do, some Buddhists don't, doesn't, you're okay either way. That was impressive. They were also impressed with images coming from China of Confucius, who was clearly an enlightened person of the highest order, who had nothing to say about God. And he just taught wisdom. And this was beginning to spawn a romantic movement in Europe, where they thought spirituality is the depth dimension of life. And they saw a spirit in nature, and they wanted to live in a spirited way. So Enlightenment fit all those connotations and helped Buddhism become what it is today globally. So I could speculate that had that not happened, many of us today, right, in this group would not be Buddhists, and Tricycle might not even exist.
Well, we're grateful then that that word was selected. There are other words that are used for the Buddha's highest attainment. One that we often see is awakening. I wonder if you have a preference. It sounds like your preference is enlightenment, but if you might say something about enlightenment or awakening and why you would prefer one over the other.
Yeah. Bodhi is one of the most important words for enlightenment in India, and it's more literally waking up. And so I think there's a shift now towards enlightenment. I mean, away from enlightenment towards awakening is the word you want to use. there's something about enlightenment that's become ossified and, made like this one huge thing. Whereas you can awaken many times to many different things, right? We don't use the word, we could use the word enlightenment that way, but we don't. So there's a shift in that direction. But and words ossify, they get old, they lose their punch right over time. So enlightenment maybe has faded. I wanted to use it in the book because it was still the main word that meant what this was all about. But I think it's much better to get more specific. So if you ask, well, what is awakening? Well, then you still have to say, well, awakening from what or to what? And better to get specific, like what is it you're really after? And the important turning point for Buddhists, many of you know this word, bodhicitta, translated mostly as thought of enlightenment, but also aspiration of enlightenment, aspiration for enlightenment, mind of enlightenment. And it was thought in early Buddhism and throughout the history of Buddhism as a turning point event in your life where that idea, that image hits you and you realize, oh, there may be ways of living my life that are far deeper, more profound, more insightful, more sensitive than the way I'm living. And so it begins a process of aspiration. So, but then you have to ask, well, towards what? What is it? Well, awakening. Well, again, awakening for what? So you could just list all the things that we take awakening or enlightenment to be about. Equanimity, patience, wisdom, sensitivity, conviction, energy, thoughtfulness, courage, compassion, practical wisdom, loving kindness. What else would we want to throw in? Sense of humor, mindfulness, concentration, unselfish values, skills of imagination. I'd want all those to be in my list. So if I ask myself, okay, what am I after here? It's not enough to say, I just want to be enlightened. Like, what does that mean in my mind right now? What do I see as the ideal that's conceivable for me? How might I deepen my life and turn in directions that I'm only vaguely headed in now? So get specific, and that seems important to me.
Thank you. Different Buddhist traditions have offered different descriptions of enlightenment. I wonder if you might be able to give some examples of what enlightenment has looked like in different Buddhist traditions.
I can. One of the points of the book is to say clearly that in my mind, in my judgment, opinion, enlightenment has meant many, many things to the history of Buddhism, and that not only is that not a bad thing, that's one of the gifts of Buddhism to us. So if you study various forms of Buddhism, you will see them describing the experience they have, describing the great master, talking about what it amounts to in very different ways. So among several in early Buddhism, in the Pali text, this one from the Samyutta Nikaya, is the image of awakening or enlightenment as getting out of cyclic existence, right? We all know that they thought of, many Buddhists, not all, but thought of rebirth as something that happens over and over, and you're thrown back into a life of inordinate suffering. So this form of enlightenment is the quest to stop being born. I don't want to be here. This is bad. So here's a quote where it says enlightenment is, quote, the utter destruction of delight in existence, the extinction of perception and consciousness, the cessation of feelings, right? So it's sort of going through the skandhas and other elements of existence from parts of ourselves and saying, it's the end of that. It's the end of living. Okay, that's one. Now, for us, for many of us, for most of us, that stark version is inconceivable, right? But we have to keep in mind that wouldn't be inconceivable for people living in Europe at the same time, where getting out of this world, just bearing this harsh world of suffering and getting to heaven seemed really good, right? That would have made a lot of sense to them. But remember also that people then faced famine, starvation, disease, armies rolling through their village, killing and raping. I mean, those aren't annual factors in our life. But we have to realize life was harsh in that era. So an ideal that projects a world of heavenly comfort and getting out of suffering was very attractive. And Buddhists had their own version of that. And it goes along with mind-body dualism, which was emerging throughout the Eurasian spectrum of countries way back then. But here's some other ones. Let me think about Pure Land Buddhism. Enlightenment is like a gift of grace that comes upon a person who's, humble enough and realistic enough to realize he or she can't really do what the Buddha expected, right? I'm a farmer. I've got 12 kids. I'm not going to be able to do that stuff. So what's for me? So Pure Land Buddhism says you realize that you are released by the grace of the Buddha. The grace of the Buddha takes you out of having the anxiety of thinking you're doomed because you can't meditate, you can't do all these things. It releases the tension and the ego of the practitioner who really wants to say, I can do this, I'm going to achieve it. And it gives rise to profound feelings of support and uplift and illumination and joy. So it's this feeling of, I'm being lifted up and I'm taken care of. So whatever shit's going on in my life, whatever suffering I'm up to, I'm okay. The Buddha's got me. And that's an enormously profound sense of enlightenment. Okay, let's jump, say, to the Avatamsaka Sutra. Some of you know, also the Huayan Sutra or the Kegon Sutra in their Chinese and Japanese translations. Enlightenment occurs upon experiencing the immense scope of the interdependent, interconnected cosmos that's all in flux. This vast process where when you read this sutra, it just describes worlds upon worlds that interact with each other. All beings, including us as individuals, reflect the whole. All beings have the Buddha nature. All beings are beautiful, although temporary in their form. They come and they go, they're born, they die, and they take a new form, and they take a new form, and they reflect and interact. They cause each other to be different. It's endlessly beautiful. There's release from egocentricity and anxiety where you see yourself in this greater flow. Okay. Let me do more contemporary. That one's contemporary, especially in terms of environmentalism. But here's an even more contemporary one. Think of enlightenment as a gradual process of overcoming habitual reactivity into a mental zone that you can call freedom from maladaptive instincts. So that you gradually practice and learn how to respond differently, say, to criticism or to pain, to other people's suffering, or to their success. So enlightenment is mindfully building wise and compassionate habits to replace the self-destructive, enslaved, unfree reactions that I've become accustomed to. Okay, that one's powerful. That one's very contemporary, and we're all well advised to pay attention to that one. Or let's jump to Zen a little bit. Certain strains of Zen enlightenment, sudden breakthrough into selfless freedom, overwhelming experience of release from the sort of self-imposed chains that come from feeling like you're trying so hard to meditate and enlighten yourself, and you let go of that, and boom, there's this sudden breakthrough into a zone of letting go. It's joyful, it's wise, it's this huge sigh of relief, even a huge shout of exhilaration. Okay, maybe another one. Let's say a slow, gradual enlightening, a process that's expansion and purification of consciousness through a long-term meditative practice that you do forever and ever, slowly dissolves habits of the three poisons, right? Greed, hatred, delusion, that have defined ordinary life. So you slowly work through ordinary life, opening up to live a life in a fundamentally different way, through just ongoing deep meditation. Can I come up with another one?
That's probably,
Well, let me just say, here's one that is really great still. Capacity to live the Bodhisattva vow, right? Which is, in the demythologized version I prefer, is you strive to care as much about other people as you do about yourself, right? In other words, the Bodhisattva comes back into existence over and over to help people. But essentially what you're saying is achievement of complete selflessness on behalf of community and all sentient beings. Okay, enough.
all right, thank you. No, I wish we could spend the whole hour doing that, but we can move on. You've suggested that, so you've gone through some of the traditional images of Buddhist enlightenment, but in your book you say that asking what is enlightenment is among the most important questions that anyone could ask, Buddhist or not. Can you say something about that?
Yeah. I stretch that question to mean a whole host of things beyond that. Like, what ideal should I be pursuing in my life? Now, if you ask, what is enlightenment for me? I'm really saying, who should I strive to become? What's possible for me? What ideals are really real for me? What possibilities are open to us as human beings? You're asking that big question. And the history of Buddhism is the history of people asking that question in really profound and deep ways. So every turning point in the history of Buddhism is somebody asks that question in a new way and comes up with a different answer. So if you think of the great Buddhists, Buddhaghosa and Nagarjuna and Huineng and Bodhidharma and Shantideva, Dogen, Shinran, and on and on. Every one of those is pursuing bodhicitta, right? The thought of enlightenment, and asking, well, really, what is that? And what are we after here? And every one of them comes up with a new version of the answer. They're not fundamentally different. It's not like, A to Z yet, but they stake out a new possibility within Buddhism. So, and this diversity is, for us, I think, this huge, huge benefits, like this repertoire of possibilities, so that we can scan through them, we can think about them. So you can think of yourself as being in this library, this global library, which we are today, or global setting, zooming into different enlightened Zen Buddhists, or Buddhists of all kinds. And we're in this global library, but we're only reading one author, and we don't even go and look at the other ones. Well, that's a possibility for us that opens up new avenues. And it allows us to be like these great Buddhists and break through. When we ask that question and apply it to our own time and our own place and our own culture and ourselves as individuals, we get slightly different answers. Okay, so so what ideals should I pursue? What image of enlightenment would propel me into serious practice? And once I get that, I can say, okay, that's the image. What practices fit with that? And that's what all great Buddhist teachers do, right? They've got an image of what it is and what they've achieved, and they can design practices both that fit that image and that fit you as a particular practitioner, so that you're able to work really clearly and expeditiously towards that goal. But the question itself is what propels practice, right? You have to have a reason to practice. And your reason could be just that, okay, I've been introduced to this teacher. I admire this person. She's, amazing beyond belief. And I want her to teach me. I want to study with her. But what you're really saying there is, okay, what is it about her? What she got that I don't have that I should pursue? So if I activate and open up the bodhicitta question and ask, okay, what is it I'm really after when I decide that she's my teacher? Then you're really off on the path, right? That is the motivating force. The thing to realize, though, is that everybody has different backgrounds, strengths, weaknesses, what passions, inclinations. So what you imagine at the outset, even what you imagine about that great teacher, will change over time. You may realize over time, actually, her great passion and her deep insight is really different than what I thought at the outset. And so your image of enlightenment as you practice changes. But as your image of enlightenment changes, so must the practices. You need to alter your practices, and they do, right? In any tradition, you progress through different practices towards something else. So there's a reciprocal relationship between our image of what it is we're after and what we're doing to get there. But this diversity is why Buddhism is such a treasure to us, right? That we've got a 2.5 millennium old tradition in who knows how many countries, in who knows how many languages, that is so rich in different possibilities. And we get to now survey them all, most of them, and pick and choose and fit them together in new ways. And I should say this is one of the great virtues of Tricycle. The Tricycle is this venue that brings all of these kinds of Buddhism together, places them right before us in terms of their own practitioners and greatest teachers. And we get to see them right next to each other and see how they illuminate each other, see how they support each other, see how they fit together, or in some cases maybe don't. But in any case, it opens up real worlds for us.
Thank you. You gave an example, or you mentioned that our images of enlightenment might evolve over time or change over time. I'm just wondering if you could give more concrete examples of how that process works, in our lives. I want to see it a little more clearly.
Okay. Yeah, well, if I were to put all the descriptions of enlightenment that I sort of rambled off in historical order, you could see some sequence and some unfolding, right? There's some coming to be. But let's say I start off, I'm going to be a Buddhist practitioner because I think it's really cool. And I know that people think I'm really cool. And I'm going to really do this. And it's going to give me certain powers that other people don't have. And so I start meditation and I get a teacher. And the teacher sees the immaturity of that point of departure, doesn't ridicule it yet, but begins to play with it and begins to demonstrate in her own life something really more profound than that. And so I begin to shift, right? Okay, yeah, better than being cool is to be really enlightened. And okay, I'm going to be enlightened, and everybody will not just think I'm cool. They really respect me, and they'll want me for their teacher maybe someday. Okay, that goes on. Then the teacher senses that, and that begins to be undermined. this is not about you, dude. This is something way bigger than that. And it just keeps unfolding and keeps unfolding. And you may have experiences through this process, and all kinds of things may happen. You may read different things, hear different lectures, and it just keeps growing and keeps growing. And Buddhism begins to happen in a far more comprehensive and profound way for you.
Thank you. Okay, so this quest, bringing together practice and your image of enlightenment. In your book, you say this constitutes the religious dimension of human life. I was hoping you might say a little bit about religion and why it's important that we characterize these questions as religious.
Okay, this one's controversial, and it's just me. But from my point of view, it is important, and it has part to do with part of the arrogance of the age of enlightenment in the West and our disdain for those uneducated religious people. So it matters to me to identify with the majority of people. Everybody can see that I'm a contemporary person, right? That's obvious. But I want to say to people, I'm religious too. In fact, the most provocative, rebellious thing you can do today, if you're in, educated classes or especially if you're around universities, say, yeah, I understand all that stuff, and I'm religious. Think about that. So it's subversive because of the anti-religious sentiment and the glory that certain atheist writers have in putting down people who are religious. But I'm going to say, no, I'm with you people. And I know what you're doing is, I'm on the same quest. I want to figure out what life means to me. And I know you're working on that too in your own way. And I know there are deep emotions and deep thoughts that are affixed to that. And I'm not going to think of myself as living at some exalted level beyond you. So, obviously, there are some clueless kinds of religions, even dangerous kinds of religions. But still, I think it's important to have this broad identification and to recognize that we're all in this together. I mean, that's the Bodhisattva vow. And if you take that in a broad way, you don't set yourself off separately, I think. But also, if you study the history and the origins of religion, religion wasn't all about God always. In fact, Buddhism started out as not at all about God. So what is religion? Well, religion is the whole spiritual dimension of human life. If you trace that back way before theism began, into the earliest traces we have of it, religion and dance and the origins of percussion and music and poetry, those are all together, and art, painting on cave walls, that is the religious sphere. It's not separate. Art isn't one thing and religion's another. This whole thing was the spiritual dimension of life, where you're really probing, okay, yeah, you need to go get food, you need to take care of the kids, you need to clean out the cave, all that's happening, but still at night, you're staring up at the stars and you're wondering, like, what is this? Who am I? And those thoughts are the broadest spiritual dimension. So not just art and dance and music and so on comes out of this spiritual sphere, but so does philosophy, although much later. Philosophy's thinking about this, right? What is this all about? So I want to take that large dimension and think of it, okay, there's a political dimension to life. You can't deny that, right? You might be clueless about it. You might not know anything about it, but it's still there, it's still affecting you. There's an economic dimension. You might be clueless about that, but you're in it. And there's a spiritual dimension, and you might not have a clue, and you might never think these thoughts, but it's affecting your life that you don't, and it makes you a certain kind of person. And so my preference is to broaden this out. And also, I have realizations that a lot of good things have come out of religion. If we just take America in the last 2 centuries, right? Anti-slavery was a religious concern. Women's suffrage, the right to vote, those were churches doing that. Civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr., so on, that was a religious movement. Religion, yeah, we can easily put it down, but everything, we can put down bad economies too, but it doesn't get us out of economics. There are bad political regimes, but we're still going to be political. So that's my ranting about needing to get larger than, and go ahead and think about this as the depth dimension, the spiritual dimension of life that we're into when we're serious Buddhists.
All right. I have maybe another question or two before we get to questions from the audience. One is that in the conclusion of your book, What is Buddhist Enlightenment? You offer 10 ideas for contemporary enlightenment. And I was just going to bring up one, maybe two that I found especially compelling. You write that contemporary Buddhists are in an excellent position to develop and extend the dimension of enlightenment that we experience as freedom. I wonder if you could say more about freedom.
Yeah, good. Yeah, probably for me and for many of you, I think, and many teachers today, freedom is the closest metaphor we can get to awakening. That awakening frees us from something. And it's important to distinguish this from the typical American freedom that sent Daniel Boone out into the forest reaches of the forest to get some elbow room, right? So where freedom in that sense means my right, my government given right to do whatever I want within the boundary of law, that's freedom. And we shouldn't be dismissive about that either. Most of us, I hope, will be willing to fight for that. But Buddhists are onto something very different, and it's an inner freedom. So the outer world, physics imposes limits on us. The social world, the political world, the economic world, all says, here are the boundaries. Now, you can stretch them, you can move them, but the inner world is an open horizon, right? So I can say, in this country, I'm free to eat all the donuts I want, I can buy all the donuts I want. But the question to me is, am I really free to buy those or not? Or is my sugar addiction, which is really real, driving me to do that, right? When I respond to my wife saying this thing she commonly says that sounds really critical, and I just blurt out something stupid, and I do that without thinking, and it just happens. Freedom from that is huge. So I realize this is a destructive instinct I've got. It's habitual. It's driven down into my neurologic structure. I just do it. Can I get any freedom from that? The answer is yes. Can I get to the point where I can install an alternative to that, even neurologically in my brain, where she says that, maybe she can't help that, and I come up with something entirely new and shock her, and it's actually sensitive to what she says, and I admit that what I do is problematic, and we go from there. That's a kind of freedom. Can I get free from my resentments, all the things that happened to me even when I was a child that I still drum up and run through my mind, still pisses me off? Can I get free of those? Yeah, but it's hard work. Takes practice. You need meditation suited precisely for that, carefully designed and carried out. Can I alter my insensitive response to your suffering? Yes, I hope so. And altering that, if I can change the way I respond, even if it's initially superficial, gradually by doing that, I'm learning compassion, right? I'm learning to be compassionate and not just feign it. And so this introspective meditation that we get from Buddhism is freeing in so many ways. And meditation overall, I mean, also many kinds of meditation free us to be able to concentrate, free us to be able to be mindful. And this is, if you have to choose one gift of Buddhism, that's it. To globally, that's Buddhism's gift, and it's now being practiced everywhere, just everywhere. And it's the power of Buddhism today.
Another one of your ideas at the end of what is Buddhist enlightenment is that contemporary images of enlightenment might allow for the full range of human emotion. You say that a lot of the traditional images are of saints who are above the fray in some ways, but that might not be an inspiring image today. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, yeah. This goes along with what we take to be our contemporary overcoming of mind-body dualism, which came into the majority of cultures in the world, let's say a few centuries BCE, and has persisted all the way up into early modernity, where your soul and your spirit is one thing and your body is another, and emotions got associated with your body. You work to squelch your feelings, to suppress them, because they cause trouble, right? My emotion of anger, and I just lash out. But feeling, affection, is one of the five skandhas, or the five components of what a person is, right? So Buddhists are in early Buddhist culture who go along with the kind of suppression of emotion. You can see it in some early Buddhist texts, because that was important then. It had to do with getting over your anger and getting over this or that. But getting over that is a problem, as we know in contemporary psychology. If you just suppress your emotions, they come out in all kinds of other ways, like disease, even mental health. So it's one of the components of who we are. It's a major component. Feelings and our emotions and so on. A life without laughter and sadness and longing and joy and love, that strikes us as, that's not what we want. So the cultivation of emotion, which is being articulated in new kinds of meditation, where that are not the suppression of emotion, but the cultivation of them and the directing of them, and the allowing them to mature and grow into elements of compassion and care and sensitivity. That's a huge part of enlightenment today, I think, and that I think we're just getting started on that. I see that as a major future for us.
All right. Thank you so much. If people want to dig into the other 8 ideas that Dale has about contemporary enlightenment, I'd recommend the book, What is Buddhist Enlightenment? All right. I'm going to jump into some questions here. The first is from Curtis. Kant had 2 definitions of enlightenment: think for yourself, and second, the moral law within and the starry night above. I've always thought that the starry night above marked Kant as a mystic of some kind. Starry night equals our original mind? Question. The Romantics, like Schelling, seem to have picked up on that side of Kant. Then Thoreau, what do you think?
I think you're right. That's good. That's good. So Immanuel Kant, living in the end of the 18th century, was a religious person. That was not in question for him. But he was this incredibly astonishing philosopher who realized you can't just assume God. You have to presuppose. You can't think about anything, he thought, without presupposing God. And that's just the way things work. But he was a pietist, which means the emotions were powerful, and religious conversion was powerful. Although he was also the image of Kant as this really disciplined, enclosed, shut down kind of guy, contrasts with those pietistic images that come out. But when we get up into the romantics and Schelling and Fichte and Hegel and even into Nietzsche, we get the development of those images in Kierkegaard, the development of those images. But I suspect you know more about that than I do.
Okay, Tyler asks, are there any traditional views of enlightenment that may be outdated or less relevant? Any that you think are especially relevant for us as individuals in the 21st century?
Yeah, good. Yeah. Well, when you say outdated, we have to mean by that outdated for us. And you always start with outdated for me, like, okay, I can't identify with that at all. But it could be there's still people in the world for whom there are our contemporaries, for whom that is really meaningful. And so, we've run across a few examples of that here. Suppression of emotion as the meaning of enlightenment. I can't identify with that anymore, even though I know I have to curtail my emotions. I have to train my emotions. I have to turn them into something more profound. For me, I think a contemporary element of enlightenment is the imagination. And in the age of Romanticism, the imagination was huge. Imagination became another component of mentality. And we now stretch that out, right? Imaginative people are inventors. They are poets, they're songwriters, they write movie scripts. They do all these great things that stretch our culture out and open up new possibilities for us. So for me, the one really profound image of what I'd like to be, which is therefore my image of enlightenment, is imaginative. I'd like to enable myself to be, even though I'm old, still keep pursuing that. Try to be more imaginative. Live out your last years in some way that isn't just running through the routines, but imagines what's possible for me towards the end of my life. Okay, that's another one. Social justice, important. Environmental awareness. For me, again, another romantic realization, connection to the natural world. I grew up in a secular household. We just weren't religious. When my friends jokingly called me the atheist, not because I didn't believe in God, I just never didn't know anything about God. My parents didn't tell me. But our church was going out camping on weekends. So it was the natural world. They didn't talk about it. I didn't think about it. We just did that. And that for me was illuminating. So that's continued throughout my life. I always get out into the natural world. When insights occur to me, that's usually where I am. When I just feel an uplift and illumination, that's often where I am. So, but that's just me. Again, these are going to vary, and it's really important for everybody to look at who they are and what's already there, right? What are your possibilities? And if you've got a good Buddhist teacher, the teacher will see you, will ask you questions, will probe, will come to understand you and point you in directions that allow you to fulfill your deepest possibilities.
And another attendee asks, do you believe there's such a thing as many enlightenments or moments of enlightenment, or does that word need to be reserved for a state that is stable and doesn't go away? For example, is a flow state a form of enlightenment, or are they separate things?
Is there a closed state?
A flow state.
A flow state, yes. Okay, good. Yeah. So you're talking in the life of one person, right? Not over the tradition. But yeah, that's why awakening might be a better word, because we can awaken in this way and that way and another way. And so a continual set. In many traditions, there are innumerable awakenings, right? You just continue to open and it continues to happen. So I think that's important. Don't be looking for the Big Bang, right? Big Bang may happen, but you're going to hope even after that, there's a bunch of little bangs that follow it. And life is a process of maturity, deepening and opening. And you hope for greater and greater sensitivity, more comprehensive vision, be able to see what is from a larger and larger perspective. Let me just comment for a second about the state of flow. I love that. That's a beautiful image of enlightenment, because for me, it rides on the background of discipline, right? You don't get into a flow unless you really work to get ready to flow, right? So let's take a dancer, right? A fabulous dancer, right? She works really hard for years and years and years. It hurts. And she's trained and she's yelled at and she changes and she changes and she changes until she gets to the point, though, where it's been internalized. It's her deepest nature. So when the event arrives, she doesn't have to think about anything. She's just gone. And her body just tells her how to move. It's beautiful. Jazz musician, same thing. Hard work, it hurts. But on the night of the performance, close your eyes and drift with it. Athlete, artist, but anybody getting into the state of flow, even in your work, whatever you do, there's a state of flow where you're just really doing it. You're really effective. Even if it's routine, it doesn't bother you, it doesn't hurt, just moving right through it. That just feels great. But you can only do that once you've nailed it down through hard work and discipline. And that's the image of the Zen master. Zen master known for spontaneity, not to begin with, but at the end of really sitting there and pushing and diving.
Another question here. Chan Master Yunmen was asked what the highest teaching was of all the Buddhas. He answered, an appropriate response. Would you say this fits with your definitions of enlightenment?
Very good. Yeah, very good. Where an appropriate response in that tradition may be, a fist in the face or a scream or something like that. Yeah, that's the highest definition. You'll see it. There it is. And an appropriate response, let's say you come up to somebody and you don't even know them and you ask a question. And as they answer it, you notice a deep equanimity, a lack of fear, deep wisdom, and yeah, they're telling you how to get someplace, around the corner to the left, but their demeanor is their response, and they are showing you their depth of enlightenment.
Okay, maybe time for one more question here, one or two. From Russell, if religious thought becomes dogmatic over time, what dogma does the West have to strip out of traditional Buddhism to arrive at secular Buddhism? And I'd like to connect this question to something you were saying earlier about the religious dimension of life. There seems to be sort of an implied critique of secular Buddhism in that answer, but maybe you can say something about that.
Okay. Okay. First, let me say that, most people look at me and say, well, dude, you are a secular Buddhist. Come on. You're not involved in these ways. And you don't believe this and that. And, if you're a Buddhist at all, you're a secular Buddhist. Fine. I know we live in a secular society and I'm all with it. So it's not a critique, so to speak. And I'm a great admirer of Stephen Batchelor, whose writings are incredibly illuminating. But when I look at his work, I say, wow, that guy is really religious. And he admits that in certain ways. So in any case, for many of us who are contemporary and who are, in the digital world, rebirth, reincarnation, it's hard to do. I can't do that. There's no way I can make that work. And for me, it contradicts all the best parts of Buddhism. And, so that doesn't. Enlightenment as getting out of the cycles of existence, nope. So we can go through, I've written about karma, and I say karma is this fabulous concept, but in order to make it usable for us, contemporary, especially global or Western Buddhists, we got to change it, or we got to get it down to some basics. And so, yeah, but those changes just happen naturally and they unfold after time. We don't have to make ourselves do that. And every time Buddhism went to another culture, it got changed in those same ways. Um, you know, by the time Buddhism was really getting exciting in Japan, when Shenron and Nichiren and Dogen and Buddhism was really launching, it was practically dead in India, right? So new things were happening and it was just opening up.
Okay, last question from me. So what advice would you give to the 70 of us currently on this call that are going to hang up on Zoom and go off to pursue our own questions related to what is enlightenment?
Pursue it. Don't let go of it. Let it be your koan. And whether you're a type of Buddhist who has koans or not, koans is just a riddle that you need to answer. And that is, why am I doing this? What am I after? Why is this important? Why do I sit here? Why do I go listen to things like this? What's the point for me? Why am I involved? And what is it that I think is possible for me as an outcome of this? I mean, get practical, get real. And that will motivate you in ways that it's hard to be motivated otherwise. Um, yes, at a certain point, you need to go beyond goals. But for most of us, including me, not now. There's having targets out there that you keep in mind and that you can assess your practice. So I can say to myself, okay, this practice isn't working for me. This one, I'm doing, say, 3 practices. The other 2 are great and they're helping me do this or that. This one isn't moving. How do I replace it? What do I design as a practice for myself that would help me overcome that issue in my life? So basically, ask it. Or as many meditation texts in China, and Dogen is one of these too. At the very end, he just says, ponder this. Or he just says, dig into that, dive into that, get down into that. All right, get into that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dale, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. If you'd like to watch this event again, we'll be sending out a replay and a follow-up email. We've also put links to Dale's Substack, Fire Philosophy, and a link to his article in the recent issue of Tricycle. Tricycle is a nonprofit, and your support really makes a difference. To make a donation, visit tricycle.org/donate. Thanks, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks, everybody.